afternoon. At the tone, Pacific Daylight Time will be 5, 4, and 30 seconds.
What? Oh my God, we're having an earthquake. Wait a minute. Hold on. Can you feel that? Yes, I sure can. Okay, this is interesting. There go the lights. Oh.
I'm Kathleen Aston for the Santa Cruz Public Libraries, and I'm here today with Beth Savage, who's going to be sharing with us her experiences of the Loma Prieta earthquake. It is October 14th, 2019. So thank you so much for coming in today, and could we start today by having you describe your relationship to Santa Cruz?
Sure. I don't live in Santa Cruz now. I've lived in Oakland since 1998, but I moved to Santa Cruz in 1983 and was here up until 1998, and I still it's definitely my second home in a lot of ways. I still come down here all the time. I feel very connected, less so than when I lived here for sure, but I still love Santa Cruz so much. Like, I really feel like it's a place that, it will always be in my heart, really. And if I thought I could swing it financially, I probably would be back here, but it's just hard, especially in these times, to come back. So it's not for any lack of love of Santa Cruz that I don't live here. It's just, that's kind of, so I don't live here now, but I wish I did. How's that? Yeah,
that's great.
Okay.
And so could you describe what you were doing during the Loma Prieta earthquake?
Sure. I was working at the Saturn Cafe, that when it was up on Mission Street, I was going to see Frank, the folk singer, perform at the Catalyst, and they had kindly let me get off an hour early. My shift ended at 6, but I was getting off early so I could go get ready to go downtown and see her play. And so I was sitting in the office at the Saturn because I had signed out on my time card already, and then that's when it happened. I don't remember what it first felt like. I don't remember how I knew that. I mean, because we feel earthquakes all the time, and I don't think at the beginning it was just a little and you kind of you kind of wait for them to stop. Now that's kind of how I feel. Like, you kind of, is it going to keep going? And it was almost like it just kept going. And then everyone was running out of the building, and so we just all ran out into the parking lot there. And I knew it was different because, it was definitely bigger. And you could see in the parking lot, you could look out, and there's a street right there, and all the telephone poles, it was like in a movie, were going like they were on elastic bands, like up and down. You could literally see, I'll never forget that, watching that happen. And the chimneys were falling down. And it wasn't like the road. I don't remember if the road looked like a ribbon, but I just remember the telephone poles, just like they were rubber bands. And so I knew that it was more than, it actually at that point had gone on longer, and we were all standing out there. I don't remember ever when I was working. I was definitely there. My boss was there, and I can't remember. I used to remember, and I was trying to remember when I knew I was going to do this, who else I was there with. I know there was someone else that I was working with, and we had one customer in the cafe. It was a very slow day, which is one of the reasons I got to leave. And the other thing I remember is all the glass. We had a wall up front by the cash register, and all our glassware fell on the floor. But other than that, when we walked back in the building afterwards, it wasn't like that much had moved around, other than definitely the glassware. And I remember making sure the customer, we were like, "Are you okay?" It was a gentleman. Are you okay? And we were just all kind of standing there whoa, and I remember going to pick up the phone, and the phone was dead. And then my boss, who's very pregnant wife, she was really 9 months pregnant, had left and was driving. They lived up in Bonnie Doon, and he immediately was just like, "Melissa," and ran. His name was Kerry, and he ran out. He just got in his car and left. I can't remember if we locked. I know we left pretty quickly. I don't remember if we locked up. I don't remember. We must have locked the building. We basically all just left because obviously something, I don't, at that moment, didn't know how big it was, but obviously it was bigger than anything we had ever had ever happened. And also there were immediate aftershocks. I mean, it wasn't like there was just one big, I think that's one thing people don't understand, is it like rocks and rolls for months. It's not like in all that same night, there were like earthquakes that we experience in, like, when they hit the news, it was like earthquakes like that every half an hour, every 15 minutes, so it was still kind of, not to that extent, but there were still like ongoing tremors that kept happening. And I lived I lived on Rigg Street, which was right, literally 2 blocks away from the Saturn. And I had my bicycle because I had been out late the night before, and I, wanted to make sure I was in time for work, and it's faster than walking. And I also remember leaving, and the Saturn's in kind of like a little mini kind of business area, so there were all the glass from all the businesses was on the ground, like all the glass fronts. Like I remember that, just walking my bike, having to walk it over glass. So I was walking home, and so to get to Rigg Street, you walk down Mission Street. Like it's at Rigg Street is like 2 blocks from Laurel and Mission. So so the first thing I remember is having to, like, not, because I was worried about my wheels not being broken from all the glass, but there was literally like I feel like in my memories, and granted it's been 30 years, but like there was just like a carpet of glass. I just remember there being glass everywhere, and being so kind of like, whoa, like this is, like, as I'm walking home, getting more of an idea of how big, because the Saturn in some ways nothing too catastrophic happened there. But so as I was walking up by like the herb room, I could see downtown. You can see up on the hill. You can see downtown, and there was fires. You could see the fires burning, like, and literally what hadn't been more than, like, I mean, I would say that's within 5, maybe 15, no longer than 15 minutes post earthquake that we all left and decided to go. So I could definitely see, like, as I was walking. So the 2 other things, I remember the fires. You could see the fire downtown. It wasn't downtown, but it was over, I think it was down in the Spruce Street area, as I remember. I at the time, I mean, again, the places are a little fuzzy now for me, but, and then also there was like the traffic, there were so many cars, it was like literally the cars were like bumper to bumper, and there was no power. So there was no power, no telephone. So I guess I forgot to say that. Yeah, like that was the other thing we noticed immediately, is the power was off. So the phone was dead, and there was no power, and so there was no lights, like no street light, no stoplights. So the traffic was and there was just bumper to bumper traffic was the other thing I remember. And so when I got home, I pulled up, and all my house, we had a porch, and everyone was sitting out on the porch, and we had, I had 2 cats, so I was very worried about my cats. I managed to locate them pretty quickly, and I remember somehow, I'm pretty sure I looked at my living. I lived in the back, and again, just a bunch of stuff had fallen off shelves, but we had some cracks in the walls. But because again, it was totally just still rocking and rolling, and so I don't remember staying in the house. We didn't do anything. There was no like grabbing stuff, or we just sat out on the porch with a radio listening to the news and not really knowing. We just that's what we did. That's kind of how that's kind of how we dealt with it, I guess, is no one wanted to be inside because we were afraid, I think, that things were going to fall down. And I had my roommate, and I asked immediately where she was, and they said, because on the radio, they were reporting some stuff on the radio, but it was like, some of it was like, they were saying they were like Berkeley was on fire, which it definitely never happened. But so the news itself was a little extreme, but that was kind of like, there's no cell phones, no computers. It's like a different time. Mm-hmm. So that was kind of like, so I remember listening to the radio and trying to figure out what's going on. And I kept thinking the power might go on and I might go down to see Frank at the Catalyst. I mean, I really remember for quite some time thinking maybe I'll still be going to see Frank tonight. Like this will get, I really, because we were up on the hill, we didn't see all all the destruction. So it was hard to know how bad it was because we weren't there really. So in my mind, I remember thinking that for a little while. It didn't last for too long when I realized the magnitude of what had happened from the radio mainly.
And for context, this is Saturn's former location.
Yeah, up on Mission Street. Yes, it was definitely up on Mission Street. One of the questions I did ask was, where is my roommate? Who, because she was the only one that wasn't there, and they told me that she had driven down. Because on the radio they were saying that the coffee roasting company had collapsed, which is where her lover worked. So she had stayed around for, I guess, a little while, but then had gone in her car down to the coffee roasting company. So yeah. So that's kind of important to my personal story.
So the next thing you're talking about is the sort of emotional or physical or spiritual impacts.
Right. Well, my earthquake experience did not end there. I mean, my earthquake experience, it still affects me today. And it also, lasted for many more days just immediately after. So it got dark. One of the things I remember is actually we were sitting on the porch and someone I know was just walking randomly up the street. And I remember saying, Grace, what are you doing here? And she didn't know what else to do there. She's like, well, we're just walking around. We didn't know what to do. And she lived down on May Avenue somewhere, not anywhere close. And she was with one of her housemates. And so she just came and joined us on the porch because they wanted to be with a group of people and didn't know really what to do. So we were just all we didn't know what was, I don't even know how to describe just not knowing and just sitting there, what should we do? We had flashlights as it got darker because it was 5 o'clock in the afternoon as it got dark pretty quickly. And so as we continued to listen to the radio, they talked a lot about the coffee roasting company and that I can't remember if that was announced that people were missing right away, but around 10:30 I decided that I wanted to go find my roommate. I just felt like she needed some help, or I was very close to her. We had actually, the Sunday before the earthquake, we had signed a lease on a new house. We were all moving out of our house that had all been in this group. We were 9 women that lived in this huge house on Rigg Street. So we were actually all leaving, and this happened kind of right in the middle of the 17th, in the middle of the month that we were leaving. So my roommate and I we were close, and I was very worried about where she was and what was going on. And so one of my housemates gave me a flashlight because it was completely dark. There was no power, so it was dark. We were just sitting there in the dark with candle. I think we had candles, and they actually were all, my friend who was walking up the street stayed, and they all slept outside in the backyard because no one wanted to be inside because, like I said, there were still so many aftershocks. It just didn't feel safe to be inside. But I needed to go, I just felt like I had to go find my roommate. So I took the flashlight and I walked downtown. And I had to remember the street, so I walked out off of Rigg Street, across, and then I walked down Walnut Street because that would kind of put me out right where the coffee roasting company was. And so it was the things I remember the most from that experience was it was so dark. I had a flashlight because there was no power, so no street lights. It was also incredibly quiet. There was no noise. And at that point, the fire had been put out. I couldn't see the fire anymore. The fire had gone out because it now had been maybe 5 or 6 hours. And the other thing that I just will never forget is when walking down Walnut Street, I walked at night a lot, and so I would walk in the middle of the street because I felt like if someone was going to attack me, I'd be it's more dangerous to walk down the sidewalk than to walk in the middle of the street. But as I tried to walk in the middle of the street, there were power lines, long power lines, they were all laid down in the street, they were all on the street. I don't even know how to, in the middle of the street were just large, they look like large black elastic bands. So I that's kind of when I saw that, even the power being out didn't make me feel like it had been quite that. When I saw the power lines on the street, I think I realized how I was oh, oh my God, this is really bad. Like, even with the power out, I don't think any of us had kind of realized entirely, like, we didn't know the Bay Bridge had, we didn't know any of that stuff. They were reporting, but they weren't reporting clearly, because I don't think they could get to this. I think they were talking about the fires in the marina, but there was not a lot of information in a lot of ways. Like, we had no way of knowing. And when I saw those power lines, I was like, oh, if they fell down on the street. And then I was like really nervous, but then I realized, oh, the power's not on. But I remember feeling like I didn't want to be by them in case something happened, and I didn't want to get electrocuted. I remember walking. And at first I didn't even know what it was when I stepped on them, because it's just not something you never would think to experience, right? Like, you're going to walk by. So I got down to the coffee roasting company, and they had, the whole area was lit up with those, they have light, like the emergency light. The place was lit up like emergency lights. And there were people with wheelbarrows. And at that point, I didn't really know exactly, entirely what had happened, except you could see that it had collapsed, like it was just a pile of rubble. So even then, it was just shocking in the sense of like, wow, like this, again, now it's becoming even like, well, this is really, really, really bad. And I remember looking for my roommate, and they were all, there was a kind of a sidewalk, so we were in the parking lot kind of back area, not the front on the mall. Well, because there was a, like the businesses, like they have parking lots in the back. So this whole thing happened kind of in the back. Like I don't even think I saw what the Pacific Garden Mall looked like for quite some time, because we weren't allowed to go there. And I found my roommate, and she told me so Robin Ortiz was her, it's complicated, but they were seeing each other, even though Robin had also been in a very serious relationship, and like, I can't remember all the details right now, but they were definitely involved. And my roommate, it was like her first love. She was 18, she was very young, had no family because her family had disowned her. And this was like her, like, yes. And so I knew how much Robin meant to her. And we were standing there waiting, like, we were waiting to hear that they found her. So basically, at that point, knew that she was trapped with Sean McCormick. And I believe I remember that Sean's girlfriend was also in the rubble. I was looking at media stuff because I was trying to, like, I wanted to test my memory a little bit, and a lot of the media stuff said that she had hadn't been in the rubble, but I remember in my memory, and I always say this, I just want to also make sure that these are my memories, and it's been a long time, but I feel like when we were there, they found her, and there was this whole thing, like, we found someone, and they had found her alive. So that may be wrong, but I feel like I remember that happening. And so we were there, we sat down, we sat there crying. I don't even know how to describe how it feels to think that someone you know and care about is in rubble.
Yeah.
And around midnight, and I remember it was like midnight, 12:30, they decided that it was too dangerous for people to keep looking, because there were aftershocks, and so the ground in the coffee roasting company, it was just a pile of bricks. It literally, they were going in with wheelbarrows and pulling bricks out with wheelbarrows. Because it was a brick building. I also remember that very clearly, that it was brick. And so I remember when they decided they were going to stop looking, because we thought she could be alive. So this is the thing, is like, we are thinking she's trapped in rubble and she's alive, and that Sean's alive and trapped in rubble. And so it was when they stopped looking, my roommate just was just, screaming, like, you've got to keep looking, we've got to keep looking, and they wouldn't, because, I understand that they were worried about their workers and causing more harm, and, but it was very hard to hear that they weren't going to be looking, especially thinking that if you might get to her, maybe she'll live if you get to her now. And so I left with my roommate, and we actually went to our new house because she just couldn't be with people. And I just remember we like lay down in the living room on a blanket, and I just remember like just all night just like laying there, like not like, yeah, it was hard, and getting up the next morning and going right back down there and waiting and sitting. And there were more people by that point. And because I think they had given us, I remember she had a watch on. I remember we were looking at the time, and I didn't know, like, we had no cell phones. The phones still weren't working. I had friends, I didn't know if they were okay. So we actually, before we went back downtown, we drove, because this is what you had to do. We drove to people's house. She had someone she was worried about, and I had someone, and we drove actually to their houses to see if they were okay, because we didn't know anything. So I remember that really specifically, also just like driving to people's houses and seeing like if they were okay. And, you know, luckily no one else that we knew everyone was okay, and everyone's houses were okay. And the power was still out. So it's like, you know, the power was out for, I believe the power got restored at least at Rigg Street, like sometime Thursday morning. So that was also just, the fact that the power was out was really part of the whole thing. It was just, nothing could open, like the whole place was just at a standstill. And, you know, it's very hard to have communication when you have no phones. And again, no computer, like it was so different. I just remember that too, just wanting to know people were okay. Like, I feel like that was a big part of my experience too, was like, are people okay? Like other people we know and care about. And then we drove back to the coffee roasting company, and there were more people, more of Robin's friends there, some of Sean's friends. And I remember his girlfriend, I think her name was Brittany, coming. Like, I remember her coming, and she was bandaged up, so I feel like I don't know, I can't remember that clearly. And so at some point, we just sat on the sidewalk waiting and talking about Robin and hoping she was okay, and whatever, if you pray, you pray. I wasn't particularly like that at that time, but we sang songs, we talked about her, and at some point so that was Wednesday now, they found Sean, and he was dead, and that was horrible. I didn't know him personally, but just knowing, I knew by then he had a young daughter. He had a family who loved him very much, his family. I think some of his family had been there at some point, and it was horrible. He was young, he was like 21, very young gentleman. And everyone who talked about him said he was a really nice guy. And the other thing that started happening that day is the media started coming. And so that's a large part of my experience, is like the media wanting to talk to us, and we don't want to, like, we're like here, we're worried about our friend, and like people want a story. And it got more and more crowded, like as people were finding out that someone was still trapped. Like there was this whole circus, is the only way, horrible circus that started happening at that point. And so that's pretty much, I sat out there on the pavement with some of Robin's friends, and I wish I don't really remember. I can see them by sight, but I don't actually remember any of their names too much. I wish I did. Robin's mother lived in LA. Her immediate family was not local, so but she had friends here that she had known from high school, that had gone to high school with her. She had really, really good friends, and it became harder and harder we took care of ourselves. We're like a bunch of young, kind of alternative people, queer and otherwise, trying to like take care of ourselves and deal with our grief and our fear in the middle of this crazy, I've never seen anything like it. I actually kind of wanted to be a photojournalist before this happened, but after it happened, I would never be able to do it. I could not believe what happened. People just wanted a soundbite. It was kind of like, I just remember feeling like they were like raping our grief. I mean, it was I can't even put into words how, that's why I was hesitant to do this. Yeah. Like, it was horrible. It was such a bad, horrible experience. That part of it in particular. Well, we're waiting to find out if our friend is dead or alive. Mm-hmm. So, like, I'm really calm now, but it was hard. It was like a lot of crying and wailing and uncertainty. And they decided to stop looking that night. And if you read media accounts of it, they'll talk. There was that was a really big thing in the news, was that they stopped looking, and we were like, keep looking, she could still be alive. Like, we really were hoping that we did not give up hope at all that she was alive until there was no hope left. And so when they said that, my roommate, she decided that she needed to leave, so we weren't really part of there was a big protest. People were arrested because we had volunteers that wanted to go in, even when the city people wanted to keep looking, and they were like, no. And it became this, like, why won't you look for our friend? She could still be alive. We're fighting for her life. We are fighting for her life. We are wanting to, like, keep going. And at that point, my roommate just couldn't, we left because it was too hard she didn't want to deal with it. So I don't remember that night as well. I remember at some point I took a cold, I had been working at the Saturn I had been cooking at the Saturn. I was still wearing my food covered clothes that I had worn. It's interesting because I still remember some of the people that came in that day that I served food to. Like, I still kind of remember the people that came in. It's very strange. And so I remember at some point we also went and ate something, and someone had let me know from the Saturn that they were saying go eat the food, because we had keys. Because I cooked, so I had a key to get in. And so we actually went and ate food. We took food from the Saturn because there was no power. Hopefully, I don't know. I feel like someone had said it was okay, but we wouldn't have just gone in and taken food randomly. Yeah. I was trying to remember that too. Like, did we just steal food? I don't think we did. I think someone said, there was some sort of chain of communication that got back to us that, and because it was so close, we went and got, because there's still no power, no gas. So I don't really remember that night as much. So back, Thursday morning, they said they were going to look, and at some point, it was like a continuation, although there was way more media. Way more. And at this point, really knowing that the rest of Santa Cruz, like, at that point, there was knowing it had been horrible, that hearing stories at the mall was kind of gone. Again, I didn't see any of that well until I feel like they put chain link fencing up around pretty quickly, and it was crazy because it felt like you were in, like, a war zone. It's kind of, that's the best way. I've never been in a war zone, but there was rubble and fencing and everywhere. I mean, that's the only way I can even think to describe how completely totaled the area was. Yeah. And there were a few houses that had fallen in the downtown area that you could see as you walked around. Sorry, it's I don't ever talk about this because it's so hard. I've never been able to talk about this because it's so hard. Yeah. It's like, when I think about all of us and what happened, and Robin in particular, and one of the reasons I wanted to do this is because I always feel like I want to remember her name and to say her name and not to forget. Mm-hmm. And to say Sean's name. I didn't know Sean, but also for people to remember Sean McCormick, and like that they're young, even though there was way more loss of life, it was part of my life. Mm-hmm. It was someone I knew and cared about, and I didn't even know Robin that well and hadn't known her that long. But she was a remarkable human being. and I'm going to just talk about her for a little bit.
Please.
She loved living. She was a year younger than me, and I was really suspicious of her when she got involved with my roommate. I gave her a really hard time. I feel one of the things I carry with me is sometimes that I was such an asshole to her. Sorry, I just swore. But I was just really protective of my roommate, and I didn't know what her intentions. I remember being Papa Bear, like, what are your intentions? And she tried so hard, and my roommate even had a conversation with me. She's like, Beth, we're going to be living together, and she's going to be there all the time, and you need to deal with this stuff. And she just would she would be like, do you want to come with us? We're going to have, we're going to go do this, and made sure, stuff like that. And I was always very resistant. I mean, I had kind of gotten over. I feel I'm happy that not too long beforehand I had finally given it up a little, and she actually gave me, the weekend before she died, she gave me this little plastic ball, and when you put your fingers on, there's these two things, and you put your fingers on it, it lights up. And that little ball that I had, it lit up for many, many years. It doesn't light up anymore. I still have it, but it and I would always do that when I was thinking about her, because she gave one to me and she gave one to my roommate, and I think she had one too. So I would always think about her. And the weekend before, she came over, and I remember we had rainbow sherbet together. I remember that very vividly. And my roommate had been down, so my roommate had literally been at the coffee roasting company. Robin had a break, and my roommate had been there with her at right before 5. Had literally just been there. And the earthquake happened right after 5. And so I can only imagine what, just having been with her so alive. And she was at that point, it was a very different time. If you were gay, you weren't out, queer, whatever. It was, people were closet. I mean, I was, and a lot of people here, there was a community here certainly about people. And Robin was very much into being out, proud. She did a lot of community work. She wanted she wanted to help the community. She had a friend who died of AIDS, and she did a lot of work with safe sex, and I know that she had her demons and her things, but she also was someone I would say, she just ate life up. I just remember that in her smile so vividly. And I wasn't that into being alive then, and I remember one of the things I used to think all the time was why it was such a bad choice to take her away, because she would have done so much good in the world. And I really didn't care that much. I remember thinking that was such a bad choice, to take her away when I don't know, because I don't think that way as much anymore, but that was something I struggled with a lot, was it would have been better. My family wouldn't have thought that. I'm sure my friends would have been upset, but I remember thinking that a lot afterwards, that she had a light about her that I think people probably, if people know her, will talk about. I think that's something that is a very common theme, people who remember her. She was also very kind and well-loved. She had people so loyal and fierce and loving of her. And that was part of what we were protecting her. We were protecting the experience of not making her a soundbite and wanting to make it not about the media and a story. But this was really real for us. And so Thursday, I believe it was Thursday evening, sometime in the evening. Again, I don't remember that much about that day. I know that there was more media. There was way more crowds down there. There were people, I know some of my friends came to find, because that's where I was with my roommate. I didn't want to leave her alone. At some point I think I did. I did, because I had to feed my cats and things like that. But and I remember they found her body, and they said that they had found her and that she was not alive. And we really thought that she could still be alive. We really, until they told us she wasn't alive, I think wanted her to be alive so badly, and that she could be rescued. And it's so strange, because I don't know why they waited. They didn't take her out. They didn't take her out that night. and when I think about this now, it makes me really angry. It actually makes me angry. They made it into this whole thing. And if you look, there was media footage of them taking her out of the coffee roasting company. That's the next day. So they had actually found her the night before. Mm-hmm. And they arranged this whole thing. So we come back. They had set up a whole, that yellow tape.
Yeah. And
they had a whole place where the media couldn't come, and they allowed us a certain amount of people, our group. We had a pickup truck with a shell in the back that we all stayed in until they told us it was time. And the mayor back then, Marty Warmhout, came out and said something about, finding her, and then so somehow they let us know that was happening, and we came past the line, we came out up to the front of the group, right in the front, and then they pulled Robin's body out in a body bag on a gurney, and my roommate fainted. And I mean, this is when I think of, and we went to hold her, and I remember it getting dark. Like, I remember in my mind, it got dark. I'm like, why is it getting dark? And I looked up, and there were literally, because we were no longer behind our protective media free, there were literally people with cameras standing over us. Like, we're down holding my roommate, and there are cameras, people trying to take pictures of us, just in that moment, in her grief. And I just remember, like, we picked her up, and we ran back. So there's media pictures of us running, and it's because my roommate fainted, and we're carrying her back so people would not take pictures of her. We're like literally trying to carry her back to our safety zone. And I mean, just seeing her body, like I can't even really even talk about it now. Like, I just was just so overwhelming in so many ways. And the fact that happened, and it's funny when I see the footage now, I feel like the mayor is, there's a bunch of stuff how she's saying we made the right decisions by not continuing the search. Like, I feel like it was a soundbite for the town, and I wonder why wasn't it just private and they just took her body out? Like, when I think about that now, like, at the time it was just all happening, we're just going along with it, but I'm like, they could have just taken her body out Thursday night with just us, without all this the mayor there. It was so crazy. Like, when I think about it now, I'm like, that was such a horrible media thing, and it's like on tape now. So, and what was so strange is that I saw people in the community after that, and they said, "Oh, I've seen you on TV," and I had no idea what they were talking about, because we didn't have we had a TV, but I don't think it even got local channels on it. We used it for VCR back then. And it was weird because people like the grocery checkers that I knew, who I would see every day, like, because I went to the same place, like, said, "Oh, I saw you on TV," and I had no idea what they were talking about. Except I knew it probably had something to do with that. I just didn't know. And the strangest thing is because I live in the Bay Area now, I had never seen news footage until the 20th anniversary. Mm-hmm. And there's pictures of us running. And it's so weird because they show that when they talk about the earthquake, like, we're running during the earthquake. Oh. So they didn't even get it right. They didn't even get the story right. Even, it's like they play the footage when they talk about Santa Cruz. They play this particular footage of us running with my roommate and say it also affected Santa Cruz in this little tiny soundbite that's not even about the earthquake. It's like, so, like, there's so much stuff around that for me. And I was, my roommate's 18. We're all like in our early 20s. Like, I was 24. We're so young, and but when you're gay, like, this is your community. You have family. This is your family, and I mean, I'll never forget that experience.
Yeah.
And I'll never forget Robin. I'll never forget my roommate. And I'm purposely not saying her name. I don't want to. I want to let her choose about her privacy. People who know me will know who it is, but I'm purposely not using her name. And so for me, like, the earthquake didn't end. And the other thing is tremors all the time. So you're constantly remembered of, like reminded of what happened and wondering if is it going to keep, like there was this kind of, your body's just always doing this because, and there's this fear, is it going to keep going? Is something worse going to happen?
Yeah.
And so that was just one part, because for me, I love Santa Cruz so much. I was in love with Santa Cruz. I love the garden. I was down on the mall almost every day. I loved Santa Cruz. And for me, the secondary part after dealing with Robin and, memorial services, and her mom came and stayed with us. And there's a long aftermath of that, of grief, and I realized it was singular to us, like it was one person and a lot of other people died, people lost people, and what happened up, on the Cypress, that was really, I hear a lot more about that being up in the Bay Area now. But I was just very much in my own personal experience, which I acknowledged, and it was just, it's always been very hard to talk about because it was so singular to this small group of people, and that just that the media and the fighting for trying to make sure they find her, hoping that she's alive, and the grief of just losing someone is just, that doesn't ever leave. But there was a whole other level of losing Santa Cruz. I love the mall, and I feel it was almost like a person to me. I loved it so much. And so the secondary part of that was that this whole was the loss of Santa Cruz. It really, because I know this is a Santa Cruz project, and I really want to talk about how that was so devastating on a whole nother level, is that it's gone. And by the time we actually could walk, it wasn't, I was trying to remember when I saw the big hole, I feel like I can't remember if you could, it was all fenced off for a very long time, but I feel like there were certain parts you could just see the big, there were big holes in the, everywhere. It was blocks of just empty holes. And why one business was still standing, then on either side there were just empty lots. And for a long time, after they took the fencing down, you just walk by them all the time. There weren't businesses there. They were just empty. They didn't keep that fencing up until everything got built. Because the mall, and they were trying to get business back. And then there were the tents of people. Probably, I know people talk about the tents, but there was a lot of the businesses were in these tents. I remember, I think Cymbeline Records was in there, and there was this noodle place we used to go to. So the earthquake didn't go away very fast. The town of Santa Cruz was dealing with that. I feel like it took 10 years for them to rebuild. I can't remember exactly, but it was a very long time. I honestly didn't pay much attention to the political shenanigans, but I feel like there was a lot of political kind of money, that part of what was going to be built there, how are we going to redefine our town? And it's never been the same. It doesn't look the same. It doesn't feel the same. I still love it, but it's definitely not what it was like before. It was it was kind of a cozy, warm place, and it's still like that a little bit, but it is much more. There's a movie theater, which I love having a movie theater downtown. It's really cool, and I went to that movie theater a lot after they built it, but it's never been the same. The Cooper House was a beautiful place. I used to go there and buy yogurt and flowers, and that having the Cooper House not be there anymore I just remember being so sad. There was just so much grief. There's a letting go and a grief. So yes, I lost someone I know, and the grief and living with someone who lost someone and being part of that for so long, that was an ongoing thing. But there was this whole other level of losing Santa Cruz. And it really did not, what normal life did not, the power came back on, I think. The power came back on, I think, Thursday morning, because I remember the Saturn opened. I wasn't scheduled to work that day, but on Friday when they pulled Robin's body out, I was supposed to go to work that night. And I remember having to tell my owner, I said, I can't come in, and he was really upset because we wanted to feed people, and I said, I can't, I literally can't. I think I started crying, and that finally, I'm not a big public crier, and I think I literally could not, and I think that's when he finally said, okay, you don't have to come in. But I was back at work. That's the thing, we didn't even get it, we had to go back, we didn't have money, I had to work. So I like literally was back to work Saturday morning, like dealing with all this stuff that had just happened. So I mean, the power came back on, and you know, businesses were open again, and the thing for me was people wanted to talk a lot about their experience, and I couldn't talk, like I literally couldn't talk about it. I wasn't able to even, I don't think it took me a good 5 or 6 years to even be able to talk about what happened, other to say that I lost someone and I really didn't want, I just would say I don't want to talk about it, because it was so, I can still feel that feeling inside of me, like how that grief, yeah, it was hard. And it rocked and rolled for many, many months. And I remember on the 6-month anniversary, there hadn't been that many aftershocks. And I remember my roommate and I were standing in the kitchen, and there was a huge aftershock on the 6-month anniversary, just reminding us this happened. It was like you couldn't get away from it. And a lot of people I know left Santa Cruz. I had the opposite. I didn't want to leave. I had no desire to leave Santa Cruz. I wasn't afraid. I kind of felt like, well, this is the big one. It's not going to happen, at least. It's not going to happen again right now. And I wanted to be with my people. I wanted to be here. I didn't want to leave. I had no desire to leave whatsoever. The one other thing I did want to talk about is that my family lives in, at the time they were all together in Vermont. My sister was still in high school. And they were watching the baseball game on TV when the earthquake happened. And I didn't realize, but they couldn't, there was no phone lines. So they had no idea if I was dead or alive, because they didn't cover Santa Cruz in the news. And this is the thing, I know that's one of the reasons we're doing this, and they don't talk about Santa Cruz, even though Santa Cruz was the epicenter, as we know, and it was devastated here. Like, I feel like our whole town, it wasn't just an area, like in San Francisco, I'm not saying, I don't downplay the damage in the marina, and I know that was very, I now hear stories from up there, what people were doing there. But we lost our whole town. We didn't just lose one part of our city, we lost our whole town changed. And so my family couldn't get any news. They had no idea. My brother was at college, and he was a tech guy, so he had I asked him, because my family always said it was a satellite phone, but so I asked him the other day, because I knew I was doing this. He said it was a business line, and back then business lines had more direct, they had more priority to getting through, because they were business lines. So he finally called on one of these business lines and got through to but it was maybe Thursday. So they didn't know for like a couple of days whether I was dead or alive. So there's that whole, I mean, there's so many different layers to like what people's experiences. And I remember my sister, she wrote a paper about what happened for her English class that she sent, that about her experience. And I was so in mine, I never even thought about how worried they were. I'm sure other people's families had that same feeling, like not knowing. So that was also part of like, it was like so multifold for me. There's like the loss of life and someone I knew, and someone I cared about, and someone that was so close to someone I deeply cared about. And then there's the Santa Cruz itself, and I wanted to be part of the rebuilding, and I wanted to be here to it's funny, a lot of people wanted to leave. I had no desire whatsoever to leave. And so when you say like, when did you know it was so bad? I mean, that, I think I still, I actually did get to see Frank. She came back about a year later and had a concert. And I wasn't sure if I wanted to go, but I did go. I remember I couldn't sit through it. I had to leave because I got really sad. But she did come back. I did eventually get to see Frank at some point. So.
I have a couple more follow-up questions I could ask.
Yeah, go ahead.
And you've shared so much. Thank you so much for being willing to share that with us. So you talked a lot about your personal community, and then like the larger Santa Cruz community, and that it changed, and that you felt like you were losing it. Can you talk a little bit about what those changes looked like what that impact looked like for you?
Yeah, I don't know that I felt like I lost, because I feel like on some level, and people, I've seen, when you hear other people talk about tragedies like natural disaster, because this to me is a natural disaster. The community, I feel like my personal community really came together, and there was a lot of community in Santa Cruz, people coming together, for sure. It felt really, the community the community did not feel fractured itself. It was the actual physical being of Santa Cruz that was fractured. So like the Bubble Cafe, gone. The coffee roasting company, which I went to the coffee, gone. Bookshop Santa Cruz, gone. Blue Moon, I can't remember. Like, I used to know a lot more of the business, but there were like places that you would go to in your everyday life that were gone. So there was just the fact that places that you liked. So for people, so everyone has a different perspective. So for a business owner during that time, they lost their whole way of taking care of themselves, right? So that there's loss of business and your not well-being, but what is that? Your livelihood. Thank you. And so I feel like that there's that loss in the community. I mean, we lost a community because the community is the people, but it's also the places that you go and the places that we went. And then the places that didn't fall down, we couldn't go back to those places. Like, I wish it's 30 years of memories, but like, I feel like it was a good long time. I don't know if it was a year, 6 months, a year before any of those businesses we were allowed to access anything on the Pacific Garden Mall, because I think because they had to take all the buildings, all the rubble, they had to take the rubble away. I mean, they couldn't just leave. But I feel like I feel like they had at some point they had opened up, because I feel like I saw some of those places before they took the rubble away in my memory. I don't remember how that would have happened, but really we weren't allowed. So it was like our community, as far as like, if you were, I mean, when I say community, I mean like, but let's go to breakfast. Let's go, like, that's community to me in a way. Like, where do we go with our community? There was no place to go. Like, I mean, like the Saturn was fine, like the places, but like, let's say, like we used to go to Zachary's to eat breakfast. You know, you couldn't go to Zachary's. You couldn't do any of the things that you think of, like, that you do down the mall. There was nothing there. You couldn't do anything. So there was that community of like seeing each other walking down the street. Hey, like you'd bump into someone you know, like you might have then a conversation, or maybe you'd invite them to come, whatever you were going to do, have coffee or whatever you were going to do. So that sense of community was gone for a very long time. And I remember, like, I wish, again, I was trying to remember, I feel like there must have been some sort of something when they finally was open for business. There must have been some sort of thing that happened. I don't remember. I do know that I do know that they never built, I think they have now, but they left the coffee roasting company empty for, I know at the 20th anniversary it was still empty, although I think they had finally just sold the property, as a memorial. But like it really took a long time for things to, so I mean, that's a huge loss of community. Yeah. So I don't feel like it wasn't the people, it was just that we lost literally our physical community. Mm-hmm. If you lived on this side of town, like, people that live in Capitola have their communities, or Live Oak has their communities, the east side, like, but, if you were like someone that lived kind of downtown, and like I lived like really close to downtown, like that, just completely just gone. Yeah. Constant reminder. Yeah. So did that answer the question?
Yes.
Okay.
So another question we have is if you could talk about any precautions you may take now against natural.
Well, what I said when we started, when it was like, I feel like I've thought about that because I know that was a question that I was I was told you were going to ask about. It's funny because I feel like I should be super worried about that. But at the time, I feel like nothing, if your building crumbles, you are not going to be able to get to your water, and there's no preparedness for being in a falling building.
Yeah.
And so that's part of it for me. Mm-hmm. I don't know if that's specifically, the other thing, and I forgot to say this, I wanted to say this when we were talking about Robin, is supposedly a beam fell down and they said, I don't know how they say, and it's so strange because I saw that footage of Marty Warmhout saying that she didn't suffer because a beam broke her neck, and she was, and I didn't even know that that's where I got that information. All these years of thinking I had that information in my head, And I had no idea that that's where I got that information, was the mayor of Santa Cruz. Like, that's how and I've always hoped that's what it was like for Robin. So, I mean, maybe because I know that can happen, like, I feel like it's like trying to, like, what do they say? Like, push us, like, what is it? The Sisyphus pushing the rock. Mm-hmm. Like, you can be ready, but you're never, again, when it happens, you have no idea what's going to happen. It's so random. Right. Yes, like, would it be good for me to have some water? But then I'm like, well, the water will go bad after a while. Do I have, like I was telling you earlier, I mean, I have my cat carriers. Well, like, I know, like, what to do, because I also worry about fire. Mm-hmm. But I mean, it's like, you never know if you're going to have a fire. It's the same thing to me. It's like, well, knowing the powers could go out. Well, yes, you have to be prepared for that. Mm-hmm. Like, it would be good to have some, but I do have canned food in my cupboard. I just don't have everything, Yes, sure, it's good. You don't know if you're in a building that collapses, you're going to lose, but you're not going to be able to find your ID, like, in your in your special backpack if the building collapses. You're not going to have, trust me, you do not think, I have to grab my when the earth starts shaking, you don't think I have to grab my ID. Mm-hmm. You just deal. You just do you just go into immediate, like, I don't even think we knew, I don't even remember being sure that we should run out of the building, except that's what everyone did, and I just followed. Mm-hmm. Because we had never talked about, I think it gets discussed more. The whole preparedness thing is on the news more. I feel like that's there had never been any talk previously. I would never even, if you had asked me about earthquake preparedness back then, like, no one had we never talked about that. It was never something that came up, and I feel like it's part of our language now, but it was never something we talked about back then, ever. Would it have been good to have some, I mean, I feel like we ate food out of our fridge, and, I mean, but our building didn't fall down, and, like, literally, if your building falls down, you're not going to be able to get to your emergency stuff. Right. So I don't know, I mean, I guess I have kind of, maybe I have a different feeling about that, having been through it, I think. Yeah. Like, I also kind of, I don't know. That's my question. And I'm also just not, I'm like, I'm kind of I'm not in the media. I'm not, a professional person. It's not, but I have friends who have a whole area.
It's good to have friends like that. I
mean, I have friends who, that's part of their life is to make sure that they have preparedness. Yeah. I don't know that that's entirely who I am as a person. I'd like to be prepared, but I'm not. And part of me feels like if it happens, you just have no idea. You just can't even prepare yourself for it, honestly. Oh, yeah. That's how I feel about it. Yeah. So.
We've talked a little bit about this, so if you feel like you've already answered it. But what do you think it's like to reflect after 30 years on this experience?
Well, like I said, it never leaves me. Like you said, I think one of the questions was, how did it affect you spirit? I mean, it's an integral part of my life. Again, but I do think of it's not just about Robin. It's about my roommate. But it is a lot about what happened in Santa Cruz itself. I still think about that a lot. It's hard. I feel like for me, it's such a different thing because I went through that experience. So there's so much grief. It's not every time the anniversary comes up, I go through a grief process. Mm-hmm. And I think that's different than for someone who didn't lose someone. Yeah. As far as reflecting, I mean, this is part of reflecting for me. Like, when I read things I don't often see our story in a lot of the stuff I've read about the earthquake, and I really wanted to make sure that somehow we were represented in what we experienced. Sorry. Take time. I just really wanted to make sure that people knew that happened, and that someone we love very much. I mean, I'll never forget when meeting Robin's mother and seeing her grief. I've just never, those are the things I take with me. Mm-hmm. Like seeing, I don't think I've ever seen, I don't know that I've seen someone I know in a body bag since. Like things like that, you just don't forget those things. They just stay with you. The anger, I don't have the anger as much anymore. I think that comes in as I'm talking about it, and I kind of that in revisiting some of the footage that I looked up some of the footage, I feel that again, but that doesn't live with me. What lives with me is just really feeling like I always want to say Robin's name. I always feel like I always start talking about her around this time of the year. I think about her more often than that, but I always thought of, I've done a couple of I dedicated photo shows to her. I feel like I just always want people to know that there was this brilliant, beautiful young woman who didn't get to live her life. And that's what I think about now. I think now, like, Robin would be 50, because I'm 54. Mm-hmm. What would she have done in her life? Like, what amazing things would she have done? Maybe, who knows, maybe she would have just lived a good life. Either way, like, what would she have been doing? I might not even know her. Yeah. Because there's so many people I don't know from that time still. When I see my roommate, I'm happy to see her. I have no idea. I don't still have contact. I think it was so painful. It was hard. There's a lot of that where I think it's so painful sometimes. Things are so painful, it's hard to see people that remind you of that too. Yeah. So that stays with me. And, I had nightmares. All that stuff. It's a trauma. So I have a trauma. I lived through a trauma, and I have trauma from it. Mm-hmm. But when I see Santa Cruz now, like, as far as the Santa Cruz part of it, it's thriving. It's still a fun, beautiful place with beautiful people. And, back then it was kind of a sleepy hippie community, Oceanside. And it's definitely bigger than that now. But I think they did a good job. I think it came back. It's not the same, but it's different, but it doesn't mean it's bad. It's just different. And I think I knew it would never be the same. I think that was one of the things too. I knew it would never be the same again. Yeah. You can't build the same thing back. I hope as far as preparedness, in some ways, some of the things I think about are like, when they built these buildings, did they build them more? So that's what I think about, is things I have no control over, is not my preparedness kit, but like, when they rebuilt these buildings, did they retrofit them so they'll be stronger? Mm-hmm. That's the type of thing I think about, is like, the people who build things make sure that they take that. The Bay Bridge was retrofitted for, like, we went through like years of them retrofitting and rebuilding the bridge because they needed it to be safer during earthquakes. Mm-hmm. And that's the type of thing I think about, is like, is the infrastructure stronger and more resistant? And the fact that maybe now they might be able to tell us sooner that we could get out of our houses and maybe be doing something sooner because they have more information. Scientific information is more accessible. I do think about that type of stuff as more than I think about my own personal little earthquake kit. So yeah, I think it's something that, like, it will be with me until the day I die. I will never forget it. It will always be in my memory. October 17th, is it 5:04 p.m. I wish I could be here on Thursday for the 30th anniversary. One of the reasons I'm doing this is I have to work, because I still have to work for a living, and I can't take the night. I work graveyards and I can't take the night off. And for me, being here with other people, knowing, and there's, like you said, there's less and less people, and one of the reasons you want to do this is 30 years, your memory starts going, and like I was surprised at how much I kind of probably don't remember too. Mm-hmm. Yeah. But like, I had a friend I didn't even know, because I was so centered. I had such a singular experience. But one of my friends recently that I worked with at the Saturn, she got displaced from her house. They were like camping in the baseball field where the pool is. I don't even know if it's still like that by Santa Cruz High. They like, because she lived on Maple Street, and they condemned that whole area. You weren't able to go back. So they were like, people were sleeping outside for weeks because they yellow tagged their houses. Yeah. And I never knew she had that experience because I never asked. Like, I felt really, I'm like, wow, that's also such a unique. And when George Bush landed, his helicopter landed in that field and like blew people's stuff away. I know, I was like, wow, that is like, because he was more important than the people that lived here, right? Mm. And we all worked, and then we all went on, we worked together. The first day I went back to work at the Saturn, one of my coworkers like pulled a knife on me. It was so crazy because I think everyone was so on edge. Like, it was weird. We had some, and then I was crazy. Like, I'll never forget that either. Like, that it's like, it's funny because he's a city councilman in San Francisco now. Yeah, it was I knew what was going on. I knew he wasn't going to hurt me, but the emotions, I remember that too, just how we all felt that way afterwards for so long. It did not just go away overnight.
Yeah.
To me, that's the most. And there's so many natural disasters now. It happens, like, I feel like we're talking about them every month, but at the time, there really wasn't that many.
Mm-hmm.
And it's also interesting being in the Bay Area and seeing how different, like, I feel sad that Santa Cruz isn't remembered as much for the devastation that happened here. I wish they talked about it more. Like, the media doesn't talk about it as much. I think my family always talks out there. They never talk about Santa Cruz. When you see the media on the 30th anniversary of the earthquake, they might mention Santa Cruz was the epicenter, but they won't talk about the damage.
Mm-hmm.
Like, we knew because we were here, but that's kind of how I felt. We were like the invisible community trying to rebuild. The media was here when they thought some young person was caught in rubble and things were happening, but then it very quickly left.
Yeah.
So there's a lot to think about. I still think about it a lot.
And on that note, is there anything you'd like to add that we didn't cover, that you didn't get a chance to say, or that I didn't ask about?
No, I mean, I just wanted to make sure that, I mean, these are my memories, and I feel like I don't want to, if I've made mistakes in my memory, just the people understand that it's just as I remember it and no ill intention there. And because of all the media, I felt once I said I wanted to do this, none of us has ever spoken about it, and I almost felt like I didn't want to betray people's memories. I felt really like I started having, like, maybe I shouldn't do it. But I feel, like I said earlier, historically I want there to be a record, and like I said, I also really want Robin's name to be said and people to remember, and Sean too. Like, I mean, I didn't know Sean, so I can't talk about him, but that there were two young people there too. It wasn't just Robin, although a lot of the media coverage is around her. But you know, and he has a daughter who's 30. Because it's been 30 years. I think she was a toddler, maybe. I can't remember how old she was, but she's got to be an adult now.
Mm-hmm.
And I think about that sometimes too. Like, there was a young girl who got raised, you know, by a family without her father, and so I think that's, just want to make that very clear, that I was hesitant, and but I really also want to say I appreciate young people wanting to know the history, and the fact that you want to, it is important to record it in a way with people who are there and remember, because it was a very big part. I mean, I feel like even though I don't live in Santa Cruz, it always attaches me to Santa Cruz that I was here. Mm-hmm. And I was here for a good 10 years afterwards. Like, I didn't, you know, so in some ways it always connects me to Santa Cruz too. Like, and then I just still really adore it here. So, okay.
Okay, thank you so much.